What happens when you take an 18-team fantasy draft of the best baseball players of all time and put them into MLB The Show in an ultra-competitive fantasy showdown? It's the Legends League!
Yeah. Hello and welcome to episode 4 of the Legends League podcast, the Lou Gehrig episode, number 4. Can't believe we're already on number 4.
I love it.
I am Spencer Silva, your host and the general manager of the failing fake Oakland Athletics.
And I'm Bobby Ray, your commissioner of the Legends League.
And we've got a good show for you today. First, we're going to take a peek at the standings, as we always do, and find out who were this week's legends and losers.
And after that, a special guest will stop by to discuss the divisional stat breakdown we did over the weekend and tell us what changes he may or may not be considering after looking underneath his team's hood.
Yeah, and then we will finish this thing off with a tip from the commissioner and a new segment, which is the Legends League Fact of the Week, where each week I'm going to tell you something funny or interesting or stupid about one of our legendary players. And today's fun fact is going to be about the only Cy Young winner in the history of MLB to end their career with more losses than wins.
Ooh, I don't know that one.
Yeah.
Nice.
So stay tuned.
Shall we go around the horn?
Let's go around the horn.
Round the horn.
All right. So before we get to the standings, we have a lot of roster activity from the past week. The busiest waiver period of the season saw 11 players added and dropped to the different rosters. Perhaps the most notable one of those is Jason Giambi, who didn't spend much time on the wire or on the Colorado Rockies. He was quickly scooped up off waivers and has been very hot for the Los Angeles Dodgers, who are still looking to catapult up the standings. Don Drysdale, Randy Jones, Max Carey, and Wilson Ramos were also snapped up and have been put in lineups. So that's the big news from the waiver wire.
Yeah, I love it. And my read on all of this activity, and especially how this activity is translating right into actual starting jobs for a lot of these guys, is that teams are really starting to get more decisive about their roster construction. Perhaps we're through that initial experimental stage where GMs were just trying things on, and now they've realized what they want their strategy to be, and they're actually going ahead and making that happen. And we also had the biggest trade of the year when your Oakland Athletics sent Hall of Famer Jeff Bagwell over to the Tampa Bay Rays in exchange for Cody Bellinger and Dan Quisenberry. I thought this was a fantastic trade for both sides. And Spencer, you pulled the trigger on this one, so why don't you tell us some of your behind-the-scenes thinking on this 2-for-1?
Well, we had been talking basically since the first or second week, and I was trying to acquire one of his top pitchers, either Maddox or Smoltz, but that didn't necessarily, we couldn't find a way to agree on that. And anyways, the whole time we were discussing Bagwell as a potential candidate. And I'll take you back to the days of the Legends League draft, but you may remember that I had asked you to pick Dan Quisenberry for me at one point, but
Yep.
The Rays snapped him up just a few picks before me, and that was really heartbreaking for me because Dan Quisenberry is one of my all-time favorite relievers. He threw about 85. He had a silly mustache, and he wrote poetry. And one of my favorite, and I probably should have saved this for a fun back, but one of my favorite things about Dan Quisenberry is that he and one of the broadcasters would pick a word like perspicacious or ecclesiastical, or so just some ridiculous word, and Dan would squeeze it into his post-game interview. Because
that's amazing.
And he wrote books of poetry, and he's a great guy, and he died way too young. But anyways, he was a fantastic reliever in the 80s for the Royals, and he's one of my favorites. So, and then from a fake baseball perspective, getting a stalwart in my middle relief part of my pen was pretty essential because he's also fantastic. So we'll see how it works out.
Nice. Yeah, I love that trade, and I love the trade so much, it's going to be featured in my commissioner tip of the week at the end of the episode.
Ooh.
So let's get into the standings. We saw more movement in the NL East as the Nationals catapulted back to first place after a really tough stretch. They've gone 7-3 over their last 10 games, and division mates the Braves also went on a tear after finding themselves just under 500 a couple weeks ago. They've gone 8-2 over their last 10. On the other hand, the Phillies, the third Legends team in the NL East, their dominant stretch has finally cooled off. As it turns out, Ralph Kiner can only carry so much on his back. And even with Andy Pettitte making a Cy Young bid, not enough pieces on this Phillies team are really stepping up to those dominant performances coming from those two players. So the Phillies have fallen down to third place after staking themselves a large lead. Now, none of that is very secure. Those teams are only separated by a half game in the standings, all three of them. So I love the NL East. It's just a, can I say shit show on the pod?
Yeah,
I'll say
go
shit
for
show
it.
on the pod.
Say it.
Then for the NL Central, the Cardinals and the Pirates continue their battle for dominance atop the NL Central. Though don't sleep on the Brewers, who we're going to hear from later in the pod. They clawed their way above 500 thanks to a couple ace pitchers and a resurgent Barry Bonds. And do we really need that guy to have another chip on his shoulder?
Absolutely not.
And then the NL West, it continues to be the place where dreams go to die, as the San Francisco Giants, who were one of my favorite teams at the beginning of the season, they've fallen below 500 to a record of 19-21, unable to find separation from the crunchy cupcake in the Arizona Diamondbacks. And the Dodgers finally broke their insane losing streak. I think they got up to 10 or 11 games in a row, and they stopped a skid that seemed doomed to threaten their whole season. But all of a sudden, the ship looks like it might be riding in LA. And then the Padres remain at the top of that division, despite running into a buzzsaw in St. Louis recently. And the Rockies are still the Rockies, but they did pick up one more win since the last podcast. So, hey.
There you go. And for the AL, things have changed a little bit, but not too much, to be honest. So the AL East is topped by the Orioles, who are holding on to a 1-game lead over the Cupcake Red Sox, who somehow are 21-21. They're a game in front of the Rays and 2 games in front of the Blue Jays, who are in 3rd and 4th place. The Blue Jays had a good series against me, and their team looks like it's starting to gel, especially on offense. However, as their manager pointed out, they are not doing great against left-handed pitchers, and there are a lot of great left-handed pitchers between Lester and Corbin in Tampa and Lefty Grove on the Orioles and Cliff Lee. So yeah, that's pretty tough. So anyways, that's a very tightly packed division. It was Bobby's division of death, and I think it's going to be tight all the way out. In the Central, the Tigers are still running away with it. The absolutely red-hot Indians, who might be the second best team in the league at this particular moment in terms of how they're pitching and their offense is doing at the same time. They're 9.5 games back, but they're still they which is just absolutely nuts. It's going to be really tough to catch them. Then you have the White Sox, who are just a half game behind the Indians, who are playing really well. And as you would hope, the 2 cupcake teams are at the bottom. And then my division, the AL West, the Mariners have been playing really well lately. They are ahead in the division, rocking a 26-17 record. I think this time last week, the division was led by the Rangers, who are a half game behind the Angels. And then I am sadly in 4th place at 20-22, 5.5 games back of first place. But the next month is going to be an absolute bloodbath in the AL West because we all play each other a bunch. I have 2 series against I have a series against the Mariners and then 2 series against the Angels. So who knows what this is going to be like in a week or two. I think it's time for my team to put up or shut up.
Another interesting tidbit here. I had a look at the standings page, trying to look for some outliers and things like win and loss record at home or away or versus division. And the versus division rivals really stood out to me. I don't think that we've seen the whole bulk of a lot of these divisional matchups. I think we're getting into a phase where we're going to see a lot of teams playing against their division rivals. And this is exemplified by the Rays, who have only played 9 games in division, which is about half what most teams have played. I think the Braves have played like 22 games against their division. So for the Rays to only have 9, which is by far the lowest in the league, is just bizarre and a weird scheduling tick. The Padres at 17-4 and the Tigers at 20-4 are the best versus their division rivals. And then on the other hand, you've got the Indians at 6-13 and the Brewers are 4-10. They've really struggled in division. Then I don't know how much you actually want to stake on this, but on the road, the Detroit Tigers have only collected 2 losses so far versus 7 of their losses coming at home. So the Tigers are really road warriors so far. And then another thing, I don't know how much to actually put stake in this, but the Colorado Rockies, who I just can't stop talking about on this podcast because they are an aberration. They are 1-22 in night games versus 4-12 in the daylight. So are they like reverse vampires or something?
Apparently. But it sounds like you've been tinkering with their lineup and their pitching and their rotation. So maybe better days are ahead for the Rockies.
Maybe better days ahead. We'll see.
Yeah, but we've been saying that every week, so we'll see.
So another big update is that with a lot of this flying around, I updated my power rankings, and I'm mostly just going to tell you the big movers and shakers here. So the Mariners flew up 6 spots in my rankings from 10 up to 4. They've been on an absolute tear. They're 8-2 over their last 10, and they all of a sudden they're challenging the Cardinals, the Tigers, the Pirates at that upper tier of record performance. Then I've got the Phillies, who fell off 6 places, pretty much traded spots with the Mariners in my rankings. They were 3rd last week, and now I moved them all the way down to 9. And a lot of that is because, like I said, Kiner and Pettit are really the 2 guys who are overperforming for the Phillies. They're not getting that much from the rest of their roster in the way that you would expect them to. So I wonder if the Phillies are going to need to finally make some moves and actually get their ship righted. The Nationals, who were my last ranked Legends League team as of this time last week, have jumped up 4 spots up to 14th on my rankings after they went on another hot streak. And now that they're first place in their division, I can't have them ranked last, right? I still think that there's some scary stuff that I saw in their stat breakdown that makes me worry about their consistency over the long haul. But of all the teams that I have in my power rankings, their arrow is pointed the furthest up. And I think that they could be a riser more than any of these other teams. And finally, I have the Giants falling down 4 spots from 8 to 12 in my rankings as they fall under 500. And until Willie Mays starts to click, I really can't believe in this roster, especially when Miguel Cabrera and Manny Machado are so darn streaky. I really wonder what the Giants are going to do to turn it around.
That's great. And that brings us to one of our favorite segments.
Legends and losers.
All right, to prime you guys up for our discussion with our special guest about the division reviews that Bobby did over the weekend, we're going to do a special edition of the runners in scoring position edition of Legends and Losers. So that is going to be the legends who are absolutely destroying the ball with runners on base and scoring position, and those who 100% are not. So Bobby, why don't you give us your legends and losers this week?
Yep. So normally at Legends and Losers, we look at who's been doing well since our last pod, but that takes a whole lot of work looking up a bunch of box scores. I just wanted to dig my teeth into some actual stats. And this runners in scoring position stat is something that jumped out, like you said, when we did these divisional stat reviews over the weekend. So I'll just read you guys the top performing legends when runners are in scoring position. So check this out. This is minimum 75 total at bats on the season, so we're taking away some outliers that have barely had any opportunities. Mark McGwire, in 19 at-bats with runners in scoring position, is hitting .474. His teammate Manny Ramirez, in 38 at-bats with runners in scoring position, is hitting .421. This is, to me, a big popped-out reason why the Cardinals are overperforming so much, and maybe not overperforming. They're just performing because they've got 2 of the best run producers in MLB history who are hitting behind Ichiro Suzuki in a lineup when he's an on-base machine. For the Braves, we've got Charlie Gehringer, who's second in average with runners in scoring position. He's hitting .424 with 33 attempts with runners in scoring position. JD Martinez has had the most at-bats with runners in scoring position league-wide with 48, so that proves how much the Tigers are really setting the table for him. And he's hitting .417 in those opportunities, just nuts. A couple other guys here. Beltran's hitting .407. David Peralta for the Diamondbacks, a big surprise, also hitting .407. Al Rosen for the Mariners hitting .400. John Olerud hitting .385. Wee Willie Keeler, which is a fun one, he's hitting .375 with runners in scoring position. Wade Boggs at .371. And then Hank Greenberg is hitting .359. I think that's all I really wanted to highlight. Other good guys who are doing well, Edgardo Alfonso, Willie Cooper, Eric Karros, Robinson Cano, and Cecil Cooper. So 2 different Coopers doing quite well with runners in scoring position. Any thoughts on those legends?
So many Tigers.
Yeah, too many Tigers.
Too many Tigers. Yeah. Who else is on there? Yeah, I mean, I guess the only team that has 2 of the elite producers so far are the Cardinals and the Tigers, which tracks very well with the standings.
That would certainly track. So before we get into the losers, do you think that this is a skill, or do you think that this is more evidence that regression is coming, and especially somebody like Manny Ramirez, right, hitting 421, almost 40 at-bats with runners in scoring position? Do you think that is just destined to plummet by the end of the season?
I think it's destined to plummet, but I think the question is how much it plummets.
Right.
As we'll soon see, there are some guys who are hitting well under 100 with runners in scoring position, which, that's sure to get better, but it doesn't mean it's necessarily still going to be great. And so what I'm thinking is that, these are all great hitters, and who knows why the game is giving them hits at certain times, because I don't think that it necessarily tracks with clutch.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, a lot of these are examples where you look at that clutch stat and the results do not match what the attribute would suggest.
Yeah, and so I think some of it's going to be fluky, but I think you're probably going to have at least 3 or 4 guys who are hitting between 350 and 400 on the season because they just keep it up for some reason or other. But how to predict who that's going to be is kind of a fool's errand, in my opinion.
Totally.
So I guess let's move on to the losers. Looks like we got a couple of losers on my squad.
Yeah, just a couple. So the biggest loser so far with runners in scoring position is a guy who's done it in a lot of bulk. Jose Altuve, the leadoff hitter for the Phillies, somehow has 30 attempts with runners in scoring position, which is more than some middle-of-the-order hitters on other teams.
Right. And on the aggregate, Altuve is doing great. I think he's hitting over 300, right?
Yes, yeah, and his on-base percentage is just crazy. But in those attempts with runners in scoring position, dude is hitting 0.33.
That's so bad.
I think that's like 1 hit out of those 30 attempts, maybe 2. So that's, maybe a sign for positive regression for the Phillies, and they certainly don't need any positive regression at this point. Down there in the slums with Altuve, we've got Whit Merrifield, who's hitting 0.38, and Ted Simmons, his teammate on the Rays, who's hitting 0.69. Troy Tulowitzki for the Orioles, who's a guy who didn't have a backup for the first, I think, 32 or 33 games of the season, and he's hitting 0.91 in his attempts with runners in scoring position. Paul Molitor, one of your guys that you were talking about, he's hitting 0.97 in his 31 at-bats. Any thoughts on that?
Molitor has really not lived up to expectations in any way. He's been grounding into a lot of double plays. But although he does have pretty nice power and speed, but he really doesn't ever seem to do it when I need it. And so we'll see if that changes.
That's fascinating, just that situational hitting. Another Baltimore Oriole, Prince Fielder, who was a guy I talked about at length in our divisional stat review, he's only hitting 103 with runners in scoring position, which for a guy that is being relied on as much as Fielder is, that's really tough. And a thing I pointed out again on these divisional stat reviews is that the Baltimore Orioles offense was just a wacko zone for really, really weird stat anomalies. So I got to think this Tulowitzki Fielder combining to hit about 100 with almost 60 attempts with runners in scoring position, that's going to turn around.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to juxtapose this list in, say, 2 months and see what they look like.
Absolutely. One of the great things about doing this, we get to actually track some of this stuff. Then we've got Anthony Rendon really not living up to expectations for the Mariners. He's hitting 111 with runners in scoring position. Joe Morgan for the Padres hitting 125. This is the one that stands out to me. What is Ted Williams doing hitting 125 with runners in scoring position?
What is Ted Williams hitting 125 at anything doing?
Yep, that is one of the biggest aberrations so far in this whole thing, and something that I'm sure is going to turn around before long. Another one of your guys, Reggie Jackson, hitting 143 and 21 at-bats. Bill Dickey, I think that's for the Mariners. He's also hitting 143. And then this is another big thing that popped out to me. 4 guys from the Colorado Rockies. I'm going to read them through in a row. Garrett Anderson, Vinny Castilla, Trevor Story, and Dante Bichette. They have 18, 20, 35, and 41 at-bats with runners in scoring position. So that's almost 100 at-bats, and they're all hitting less than 150.
That's remarkable.
Absolutely remarkable. And then some other honorable mention guys. I didn't write down their full stats, but other guys who are just not getting it done with the chance to drive in runners. Joe Torre, Juan Gonzalez, Alex Bregman, Francisco Lindor, Roberto Alomar, Jose Reyes, Mike Schmidt, Jorge Posada, Jason Giambi, and Victor Martinez.
And that's it for Legends and Losers. And next we are going to have a guest. So this past week, Bobby was kind enough to go through all of our teams and review how we've been doing for the first full month of statistics. And Bobby, I'm just going to kick it over to you and have you explain exactly what you did on Twitch this past weekend, because it was such a gift to all of us.
Yeah, thanks, man. One of the hardest things about being the commissioner of this league has been the burden of communication. I have all the stats in my PlayStation 4, and trying to get all those stats out to the participants in this league in a way that's expedient for me and doesn't take forever, and is also in a consumable fashion for you guys, has been a really big challenge. So rather than giving a bunch of stat updates or keeping any kind of leaderboard in some kind of Excel document that I have to update every single day, I'm just going to take a few keystones throughout the season and give you guys a massive statistics dump, kind of like what we saw this past weekend. So now that we're a little bit more than a month into the season, I went through every single team and showed you the really deep run of stats, from batting average, triple slash line, looking at some defensive stats like range factor, errors committed, and then even getting into the weeds on some stuff like platoon splits versus left and right-handed pitchers, or as we were talking about in Legends and Losers, how people were doing with runners in scoring position. So it was about 6 hours of content that we pumped out over the weekend, and it's all up there on Twitch and on YouTube for you guys to go see how your players are doing.
And of course, that is all found at PFK The Show on Twitch. And you can also get plenty of PFK The Show content on Twitter as well at the same handle. And now we're going to bring in our guest for the week, who is the manager of the Milwaukee Brewers and an old friend of both of ours, Paul Moses.
Be our guest.
What's up, Paul?
Hey guys, it's good to be here.
Great to have you.
Great to hear your special voice. So how are things in Milwaukee?
Not the way we expected them to go. You know, obviously the draft is a little bit of a crapshoot. None of us had a great idea what we were doing, but I kind of had a hope that I had the best draft out of our division, and instead I find myself looking up at two of the best records in the league. I just crossed 500 for the first time the other day at 21-20. Some disappointing performances, some things not going the way I want, but also some keystones. I feel like I have the bones of a good team, and, you know, at 500 a month and a half into the season, like there's no reason I can't go on a run and continue to, and maybe contend down the line.
And tell us who your hogs are. Who are the guys that you're leaning on both the top of your rotation and saying them, and give us the big dogs in the middle of the lineup.
Yeah, so I mean the lineup is anchored around Barry Bonds and Albert Pujols, you know, the two best sluggers of my childhood and adolescence, really my adolescence. So that's been really fun to watch, and they've been, you know, especially Pujols, but now both of them have really been holding it down for me. The rotation is a little bit sketchier. It's headed by Masaichi Kaneda, the best Japanese pitcher probably of all time, and Fergie Jenkins. Everyone else has been kind of meh. So those are the guys that I built around, and, you know, had some surprises, both good and bad, on top of that as well.
And Bobby, when you broke down each of our teams, you told us the first thing you did is you enumerated the things that you had mentioned at the beginning of the season that you thought were going to be keys for each of our teams. And what did you say about, remind us what you said about Paul's team?
That's right. So my first key for the Brewers was that either their starting pitching staff can go consistently deep, or that they had to rely on Dontrelle Willis, who is their long guy out of the bullpen, as to be an absolute all-star presence. There's some not exactly fantastic pieces in the middle of this bullpen. So on days where you see Kaneda or Fergie Jenkins taking it 7 or 8 innings and handing the ball over to Kenley Jansen, the Brewers are pretty close to unbeatable. But without Dontrelle Willis performing up to that all-star level, you would worry about if a starter can't go that really long distance. So that was my first key. The second key was that the lack of speed in their outfield doesn't prevent their defense from being elite. So all three of the outfielders for this roster, which are Barry Bonds, Larry Walker, and now Al Simmons, I think that was a new addition, right? Yeah, because you started with Andrew Jones and Torrey Hunter out in center. And all those guys have really good defensive stats, but none of them are blindingly fast. So I had to assume that their fielding stats could make up for their lack of speed. And then key number 3 was that Johnny Bench could actually handle being a cleanup or middle of the order RBI presence, even though he was going to be catching every day. And with his incredible defense, you really don't want him in a platoon role behind the plate. So I had concerns about his energy level staying high enough to allow his bat to produce at the power levels that you were relying on him to do.
And so the scorecard so far is that Dontrell Willis is not doing great. And Johnny Bench, who is being relied upon in the middle of the order, is also not doing so great. So, Bobby, can you give us do you know what their stats are off the top of your head?
Yeah, so Johnny Bench is triple slashing 243, 289, 429. He only has 15 RBIs in his 140 at-bats. The 7 home runs is encouraging, and he's not walking too much, which, as I've said multiple times on these analysis shows, I don't really think you want your cleanup hitter walking a lot. I think you want him swinging that bat. And then D-Train has been, he was pretty good to start the season, if I remember correctly, but his ERA has ballooned to 5.06. His whip is 1.78. And that's in 21 and a third innings pitched. So that's getting close to a sample you can actually start to respect.
Ouch. But I guess, Paul, one of the things that I'm curious about is what did you think of Bobby's analysis, and what are the things that you're thinking about going forward?
I think that, well, I might have been skeptical at first because everyone thinks their team is perfect little angels. It's mostly come true. I think the defense is held up. I think that my team defense is excellent, and I'm really happy with how they're doing. But Johnny Bench as the middle of the order bat, that experiment seems like it's about to end because I just can't have you can't have a sub 300 OBP from your cleanup hitter. That just doesn't work. And then same with Dontrell, has not been pitching terribly well. His whip is almost 2. He's mad that he's not my ace, even though he's nowhere near that on talent. So yeah, I think that on those 2 factors, Bobby hit it right on the head. And those are big reasons that I've been struggling and I'm more around 500 rather than being in playoff position.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that we all have to navigate, is that because it's a pool of entirely legends, almost every pitcher in the pool, even the ones that are 78, 79s, a lot of them think that they should be the ace, and anything but that, you're gonna get docked on several different of their attributes are going to be minus. The top is going to be lopped off of them a little bit.
And that's really going through, that was something I noticed when Bobby was going through my staff, is that all of my starters except for Kaneda and Fergie have huge penalties to the overall that I drafted them at. So this last week of waivers is definitely going to be a little bit of rejiggering the pitching staff to try and get a little bit more out of it, because I can't go 2.5 deep and expect to be a playoff contender.
Yeah, it looks like Oral Hershiser is one of the big disappointments. Looks like you drafted him as a 98 and he's pitching as a 93, even though overall isn't everything. But
yeah, Greinke has a 6.5 ERA and is down to from a 96 to a 90 overall. It's not great.
Brutal. And so one of the things that I noticed is that since we made that trade for Al Simmons, I traded Paul Al Simmons for Dan Herron, and Paul was immediately looking to the waiver wire to find a new 5th starter. And what he came up with was old man Al Spalding, which that can't have felt good because Al Spalding is kind of a notorious figure, the founder of Spalding Sports. And he's the guy who engineered the greatest baseball myth of all, that Abner Doubleday was the founder of baseball, which is just complete bullshit. And so I guess we're going to see if that bullshit and trickery can translate to the mound. And so far he's been pretty good, hasn't he?
Yeah, that's one of the things that has come out of having a little bit more information about my team, is I've seen that my defense is for real. So I went out and targeted someone who could pitch to that defense. He's not the one big weakness in Al Spalding's thing is he doesn't throw hard and he doesn't strike people out, but he's a soft contact type of pitcher. He doesn't walk guys. He doesn't have a lot of home run problems. And so put him in front of the defense I have. And I think that he's in position to really maximize how he could perform in the game.
I absolutely love that strategy. That's exactly the kind of bigger zoomed out strategic thinking that I think is going to end up making the difference and see who makes the playoffs and who misses it.
Yep. So now I just got to find more guys like that. I really whiffed with what I valued in pitchers, when I was drafting. The problem is that now all the good pitchers are on good teams. So I have to kind of figure out like pitchers that fit my profile that are not going to be as good. You know, I'm not going to go out and find myself like a Cy Young or a Clayton Kershaw or whatever. So I have to kind of make it work with the Al Spaldings of the world.
And I guess this is actually a perfect connective tissue to translate to the bigger division previews, because I think one of the things that I noticed when Bobby was flipping through all the different teams is that there were some teams, and specifically I'm thinking of the Atlanta Braves, drafted like 10 starting pitchers, and their bullpen is filled with Robin Roberts, Bert Blyleven. These are dudes who are they're probably in the top 20 starting pitchers of all time. And he's got him at the back end of his bullpen. And so I think for a lot of us who like waited on pitching in the draft, those guys who kept compiling starters really thinned out the top, say, 3 tiers of starting pitchers to where, you know, you're kind of holding the bag towards the end of the draft if you're looking for a 5th starter. What do you think about that, Bobby?
I completely agree. There seem to be, especially in pitching, some really big tier drops, TIER, not teardrops like I'm crying. But at the very top, you've got the aces that went in those first couple rounds. Then there were some other guys that were right in that tier. And then it seemed like there was a big fall off, big pool of guys that were really solid number 2s, then another huge fall off. And that's kind of where the rest of the pitching stock has been. And you're right. When a team like the Braves are grabbing 10 starters, twice as many as most teams are doing, and sequestering them away in that bullpen, that makes that stock so much thinner. And that's just supply and demand. That's economics. That's turning starting pitching into a higher valued asset.
Yeah, and to the point that we were talking to earlier with Al Spalding, one of the other things too that I've been thinking about, and Paul and I have discussed offline, is how it seems like some of the pitchers with softer stuff, some of the old school guys that don't have the big break or the big velocity, but have the really high attributes with home run per 9 and hit per 9, how those guys seem to do really well, especially if they have a decent defense behind them. And I guess, Bobby, I wanted to turn to you and ask, since we're talking about pitching, what are the staffs that are being successful right now? What do you attribute that to? Or what are the rotations that really stand out to you at this point in the season?
That's a fantastic question. I don't think I have a well-researched answer to this, so I'm just going to kind of pull from the hip and go with my gut here. The number 1 pitching staff, I think top to bottom, is the Baltimore Orioles. And one of their keys that I kind of pointed out for them is that they're a strikeout-reliant team that I was really worried about them running up against some of these super high contact lineups, looking back at some of the old-timey players that have massively high contact because they hit 400 on a regular basis back in the turn of the century kind of ball. And so they have these crazy high contact stats, but not much in the way of power. So those high strikeout guys, we know that they get victimized by the home run. And yeah, I was wondering if that imbalance was going to hurt them. But it turns out, no. The Orioles are just absolutely dominant so far. You've got Nolan Ryan with a 1.57 ERA, Lefty Grove with his whip under 1, Cliff Lee, who's not even as good attribute-wise as a lot of these other starters, and he's still having a lot of success. Corey Kluber, the same thing. So yeah, the Orioles are quite good so far. It's really just the AL East. The Rays have a really solid staff. They're getting incredible performance out of John Lester. The Blue Jays, who invested heavily in pitching, taking Roger Clemens and Tom Seaver at the top of the draft, also getting great performances from Jack Morris, recently acquired Luis Castillo. And a lot of these guys are those high strikeout guys. Now, one thing that I think is going to be a difference here that we won't see play out until the season really expands, but I wonder if some of these guys who are going to put up eye-popping numbers over the course of a long grind in the regular season are maybe going to not be as reliable in a playoff scenario. Going back to what I was saying earlier about loving that strategy that you're using, Paul, with finding low strikeout, weak contact guys and relying on your good defense, I think that might actually be a better playoff strategy because it's something you can rely upon. I don't know that you can rely on a high strikeout pitcher in the same way in terms of like, I've got a game that I got to win right now. What can I actually rely upon? That's just an opinion. I don't know if that's true, but that's my gut take.
Cool. And I guess what were your biggest takeaways in terms of trends and what you're seeing so far from doing the divisional reviews, I guess?
One big thing that I took away and was really encouraged about is that a lot of those keys to a legendary season that I laid out at the beginning when I did divisional previews back when we were in spring training, they've all actually been pretty predictive. When teams are hitting those keys, they're winning and they're getting good performances. Teams that aren't hitting those keys, like the Brewers, which we've already pointed out, they actually tend to struggle record-wise. So that's encouraging to me because it tells me that MLB The Show and the simulated league that we're doing actually acts like real baseball. Yes, that's so cool. You could actually take things that you might have written a baseball article about at the beginning of a real baseball season, and you see the analysis actually play out like it would in real life. That just makes me so excited about this whole Legends League and this whole thing we're doing. Before we move on too far from the Brewers, I wanted to ask you, Paul, about lineup construction, because that's a thing that I've been really keyed in on over the last couple weeks as we've started to see sample sizes of stats even out. I've heard you mention in the chat before lineup optimization as a possible reason for batting Barry Bonds second in your lineup, and I was wondering what your reasoning is behind that.
Yeah, I think, as sabermetrics kind of go in waves, at first there was some amount of like, well, it doesn't really matter what order you hit guys, et cetera. But what they've really settled on is that like the best place to put your best hitter is second. It's the best way to get them the most plate appearances without bringing them on with empty bases too often. And so that's why like I kind of value the cleanup spot less than is tradition.
Wow.
I want my best hitters hitting 1, 2, 3 so that they get to the plate the most times.
Okay.
Unfortunately, I thought I was hitting my fourth best hitter at cleanup spot. That has not been the case with Johnny Bench, and I'm going to have to do some shuffling down below. But yeah, I mean, I know that the game, from what I understand, treats kind of 1, 3, and 4 as the all-star positions for hitters. And it's, if you look at how some of the kind of most modern teams in the league are sitting up, like a lot of them are hitting some of their best hitters second. You look at like Mookie Betts with the Red Sox all those years. I think even Cody Bellinger with the Dodgers was hitting a lot second last year. Like a lot of these teams are keyed into like, yeah, sure, traditional slugger, you hit him low. It's no, just get him to the plate.
Well, I guess that's actually one of the things where you have to think about whether or not the game is programmed to actually process that type of information. So clearly the game makers, if they made 1, 3, and 4 at the spots in the lineup, the star spots, clearly they have not evolved to the point where most MLB teams and front offices are, where they think the second spot is the most important for the best hitter. And so I wonder if, as Bobby is referred to with the runners in scoring position skill, insofar as maybe it is a skill in this game, even if it's not a skill in real life, what if it's a skill in the game, I
still am going to go with like, no matter what the game mechanics are, the higher in the order someone is, the more plate appearances they're going to get. So I'm just going to roll with it. I do definitely need to switch up my lineup like from 4 on down. Like the Johnny Bench thing is not working. And I've got, Alan Trammell, who's been hitting 7, 8, 9 all year, has like clearly been one of my 3 best players. Lance Berkman is hitting like 360, 400, like 580 or something like that. So he's someone who could be a candidate to take the cleanup spot. So like, I'm really not too worried about like Bonds, Pujols at 2 and 3. I think that part's working. It's about kind of bridging the gap between them. Like I've been getting a lot of production out of like 6, 7, 8 and not as much out of 4 and 5. And so trying to kind of bridge that gap more than worrying about the top of my lineup. Although that does bring, this is a slight shift forward of the kind of balancing the stat dive that Bobby just did in a month's worth of data. Someone like Nap, I'm still going to call him Nap Lajoie, who
Yes.
as a leadoff hitter, 99 contact on both sides, high 90s for vision and discipline versus 318 OBP. And so, which of those is real? Which one of those do I want to respond to? And how does that affect my lineup construction as well?
Yeah, he's been striking out a ton. He has 40 strikeouts in 171 at-bats. I think he's leading the league in at-bats as well, which is fascinating about your concept of bringing your best guy up the most often. Well, he's leading the whole MLB in at-bats, and that's with a 251 average. And then to those 40 strikeouts, he's only walked 17 times. So yeah, I wonder if that is a skill thing or if that's just a coincidence and you could see that regress in the right direction.
But what is up with that? He's got 88 discipline, 96 vision, and then elite contact from both sides. See, that's the part of the game that I just absolutely 100% don't understand. It's like it's the same thing. It's like on my team, it's because obviously I have to talk about my team at some point. I have Stan Musial, who's got 99 contact on each side, 99 vision, 99 discipline. And he's like one of my team leaders in strikeouts. And so I guess that's one of the things that I continue to be gobsmacked by me is that the actual skills that we know these players by aren't translating at all to the Legends League.
Oh yeah, Barry Bonds is just getting caught. Like I have seen him flail at fastballs in off the plate so many times,
Right.
and breaking balls in off the plate, and I'm just like, what? I watched Barry Bonds play. Like,
Yeah,
what?
he never did that. He never did that. Never.
One of the funniest things for me with this Legends League colliding with real life was one of the first at-bats I saw at the beginning of the season was Barry Bonds versus Randy Johnson. And Randy Johnson made him flail at a slider. And then I went and was curious and looked up how did Barry Bonds fare against Randy Johnson in real life. And turns out Barry Bonds absolutely ate the big unit's lunch. He only struck out one time in a whole bunch of at-bats, just tons of home runs, was just a pain in Randy's side. So, yep, there's only so much reality that comes out of this sim.
And you have to love the revisionist history there if you as a Mariners fan.
Oh, it's so sweet. I love it.
Great. Is there anything else we want to talk about before we move on to the next segment?
I guess one thing that I wanted to mention that I'm kind of curious for y'all. So like Alan Trammell, like I said, has been hitting 7-8-9 for me all year, but has been one of my 3 best hitters. Like, to what degree should I see that as real, and to what degree am I worried that if I bump him up, from 8 or 9 to 2, like, is that gonna put a dent in his production, hitting a whole different part of the lineup? Like, should I be more measured about that, or is it just no, this guy's hitting, like, go get him out there?
Ooh, I love that question because it hits me right in the strategy, and that's perfect. So there's 2 arguments here. I think both are valid, but choosing which one to go with is really more what you think about the game, right? One argument says if he's seeing success, don't change it, right? Don't fix something that isn't broken. He has a 401 on base percentage. And then on the other side is what I've been talking about the last couple of weeks is, oh my God, he's got a 401 on base percentage. What are you doing not putting him in front of Bonds and Pujols, right?
Yep.
And especially because he's not a guy who's clearing the bases with home runs at as high of a rate as these other guys, is maybe that's more of a reason to get his high discipline, low strikeout, good on base stat in front of the guys who can bop those home runs, sneak out a couple run or 2 based off lineup construction. The way I play the game, I would put him in the 2-hole immediately.
Mm-hmm.
I would say the same thing. But one of the things that's kind of probably an aberration at this point is I checked it earlier, but it looked like Trammell was slugging .613 despite a 56 power attribute versus right-handed pitchers and a 60 power attribute versus lefties. And it's mostly doubles. I think he's one of the league leaders in doubles. You probably can't depend on that forever because if he's slugging .613, I don't know, you probably maybe you want him in your 2-hole, but then there's an argument for moving him up, but maybe more in the middle of the lineup when you have your big on base guys there. So if I were, I had told Paul this offline, but I told him he should just move the entire lineup down and just stick Trammell in the 2-hole and have Barry in the 3-hole and Pujols in the 4-hole, and then look out. But we'll see.
We'll see. It's definitely going to be, the stat dive combined with the podcast appearance has been really good for just forcing me to really think about my team. And especially with, the waivers starting to lock, this feels like a big change weekend for me if I want to start moving up the standings and challenging the Cardinals and Pirates.
That's great, man. It seems like a great place to end it. Thanks for joining us, Paul. Appreciate it. We'll see you on the Discord.
Yeah, great talking to you guys, and been enjoying the pod.
Nice. Great to have you, Paul.
All right.
Take it easy, Brood. Bye.
Sweet. Bye, guys.
Later.
The Commissioner's Tip of the Week.
This week's Commissioner Tip of the Week isn't as much about the game MLB The Show as it is about navigating a league that feels like a typical fantasy contest, but actually has much more complexity. So in your usual redraft or dynasty fantasy baseball format, trades often end up an attempt to swindle your trade partner and take a lot of value out of an unbalanced deal. It's not to say that balanced trades don't happen in fantasy, but in head-to-head and especially in roto leagues, there's a cut and dried winner and loser from just about every trade. I'm here to tell you that's not true in real-life baseball, and it's especially not true in the Legends League. That's why this week's tip of the week is to look for a win-win trade that improves your playoff odds without trying to squeeze every drop of value out of the deal. We've already seen a couple fun trades go down in this league, with that recent Bagwell for Bellinger and Quisenberry trade being a fantastic example of this win-win mentality that I'm talking about. Since we're not just counting up fantasy points or trying to just accumulate stats, there's room for teams to find a middle ground that helps both of their rosters over the long haul. So in this past example, we had an elite tier bat go from Oakland to Tampa Bay and plug a middle of the order slot that the Rays sorely needed. In exchange, the A's received a defensive upgrade at 2 positions. They moved Bellinger to a corner outfield slot, as well as replacing Bagwell's troublesome defense at first by moving Stan Musial from corner outfield to there, where he does project as a better defender than Bagwell, as well as removing him from that corner slot. Then by taking the offensive downgrade from Bagwell to Bellinger, which you could argue how far of a downgrade that is, the A's actually recouped a massive upgrade to their bullpen in Quisenberry, who then gives them a reliable bridge arm and middle relief. Both teams got better from this deal, and that's the best thing that you can hope for. Regular fantasy doesn't have defense or batting order or any of these other complexities, but Legends League does, so use it to your advantage. On top of all of that, there are 9 teams that don't even play in the same league as your team. So say you're in the AL and you can find a deal with an NL team that improves both of your rosters. You get an extra edge by finding value that the people in your same league don't get to receive benefit of on the other side. So my big piece of advice at the bottom of this is not everybody in the league is your enemy. You might find an ally across the country that can lead to an opportunity that could be the difference between making the playoffs or not. Don't try to win a trade. Win your division.
Awesome.
And now Spencer's going to close the show off with a fun fact. So here's the debut of our new drop for Fun Fact.
Okay, on to the inaugural Fun Fact of the week. So each week, just to remind you, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be telling you something fun, silly, or interesting about one of the players in the Legends League pool. They might be on your team. They might be on the waiver wire. Who knows? I'm just going to dig around and find funny stuff or interesting stuff to bestow upon you each week. So anyway, the subject of today's fun fact is the only pitcher in the history of Major League Baseball to ever win a Cy Young but finish their career with a losing record. So I'm going to give you a few hints. I'm not going to just lay it out there for you. He was a soft-tossing lefty with a slow curve and darting sinker who topped the Padres' rotation in the 1970s. He went by the nickname the Junk Man because of his underwhelming repertoire of slow and even slower pitches. In fact, one of my favorite things that I came across was that legendary third baseman Mike Schmidt once said of the Junk Man, "If I were a pitcher, I'd be embarrassed to go out on the mound with that kind of stuff." One time, after failing to muster anything against the Junk Man, all-time hit leader and switch hitter Pete Rose batted same-handed, which was left-handed, against Jones. And it didn't work. On the back of yet another offer, he told the media, left-handed, right-handed, cross-handed, he still gets you out.
Cross-handed, that's a new one.
So anyways, without further ado, the Junk Man, drum roll, is Randy Jones, one of the newest members of the Oakland Athletics. And this is one of the big reasons why I picked him up, because I was reading about him and I thought it was great. Anyways, the record in 10 Major League seasons, Jones went 100 and 123. But of course, that record belies his greatness otherwise. At his peak, the Southern California native was legitimately one of the MLB's best starters. In 1975, Jones won 20 games and ended the season with a spotless 2.24 ERA and 285 innings. Holy crap, that's a lot of innings. But get this, he finished behind only Tom Seaver in that year's Cy Young voting, but the following season he was maybe better, even though the ERA was a little bit higher. He won 22 games, and that year he logged an insane 300 and a third innings and finished with yet another sub-3 ERA.
They don't build them like they used to, man.
I know, seriously. So over the course of his career, Jones piled up 22 WAR and finished with a pretty respectable 3.42 ERA and 125 WHIP. And so you might be thinking right now, like, how did such a great pitcher end his career with a horrible record? The short answer is the Padres were really, really freaking terrible back in the day. And so I was looking through on Baseball Reference each of their season-long records for the 1970s, and almost all of their seasons were in between 58 and like 69 wins. They're really, really bad. And so actually the year before he won the Cy Young, Jones had the dishonor of losing 20 games.
Wow.
Really, for most of his tenure in the major leagues, he was just on god-awful teams. And I just wanted to, for our first fun fact of the week, raise a glass to the Junk Man.
To the Junk Man.
To the Junk Man.
Hell yeah.
So anyways, I think that's all we got for you today. Do you have anything? Do you want to tell everybody where they can find us, Bobby?
Yeah, you can find us on Twitter at PFK The Show, on Twitch, also at PFK The Show. Search for PFK The Show on YouTube. Basically, just look for PFK The Show. That's us, playing for keeps. And then this week, you can look forward to upcoming matchups. Another clash between your A's and the Seattle Mariners. The Dodgers will try to find their footing against a suddenly slumping Philadelphia team. St. Louis and Pittsburgh are going to duke it out to see if either team can cement themselves at the top of the division. And then later in the week, a highly anticipated matchup between the red-hot Mariners and the cream of the league, the Tigers. Yeah, I said cream of the league.
Oh, I can't wait. I'll see you on the field.
See you on the field.
All right, see you later.
Thanks for listening to the Legends League podcast, brought to you by the Playing for Keeps fantasy baseball community. Follow us on Twitter at PFK The Show. Check out our YouTube page for box scores, highlights, and game recaps. And check out all the action streaming live at twitch.tv/PFK The Show.